The basement door that wouldn't stay shut. Based on multiple family accounts, Pennsylvania, 1994-2008. In 1994, the Dennison family moved into an aging Victorian home in a quiet Pennsylvania suburb. It was large, creaky, and sat on a slight hill with a basement that extended underneath the entire house. The former owner, an elderly man named Harold Greaves, had passed away the year before. His children sold the house quickly and cheaply, eager to move on. Almost immediately, the Dennisons noticed something strange. The basement door refused to stay shut. Every morning, without fail, it would be open. At first, they blamed the kids or the drafty hallways. But even when locked, even with furniture braced against it, the door would still creak open by morning. The basement itself felt wrong. There was a narrow stone stairwell and a dirt floor beyond the concrete slabs. The lights flickered. The air was damp and cold year-round. The family's dog, Murphy, would bark at the basement for hours and refuse to go down the stairs. Things escalated gradually. One night, Mrs. Dennison was doing laundry when she heard whispering low, raspy words from the far end of the basement. She called out, thinking one of the kids had snuck down, but got no reply. When she turned, she saw muddy footprints leading toward the stairs, small ones, like a child's, even though all three kids were upstairs watching TV. Their youngest daughter, Lily, began talking about a man she saw in the dirt. She said he lived under the stairs and crawled like a spider. At first, her parents dismissed it as imagination, but then Lily started sleepwalking, always ending up in front of the basement door, sometimes trying to open it, even in the middle of the night. Mr. Dennison decided to bolt the door shut from the outside. That night, they heard scratching, slow and deliberate, like fingernails against wood. When they investigated, they found deep gouges in the door from the inside. They called a local priest to bless the house. He didn't stay long. After walking through the basement, he told them quietly something was left here. I don't know what, but it wants attention. Years passed. The Dennisons never went back into the basement unless absolutely necessary. When they eventually sold the home in 2003, they didn't mention the door. The next family, the Parkers, moved in with 2 young sons. Within weeks, the same pattern began. Scratching, whispers, open doors. One night, their oldest son screamed from the basement he'd gone down to retrieve a ball and said he saw someone crouched in the corner, watching him. When they went down, there was no one there. But small handprints were smeared into the dirt floor. Eventually, the Parkers moved out too. By 2008, the house was back on the market, now owned by a developer trying to flip it. During renovation, workers uncovered something behind a false wall in the far basement corner, a wooden crate filled with children's shoes. Some were so old, the leather had rotted through. Inside, the crate was a note barely legible, written in faded ink. It read, "He keeps them for himself. Tell no one. Lock the door at night." The crate was burned, the wall rebuilt. But today, the house sits empty, for sale again. And every time a new realtor unlocks the front door for a showing, they find the basement door already open. The locked room at Grenfell Hall. Based on witness reports, Cornwall, UK 1979. Grenfell Hall was once one of Cornwall's grandest estates, a towering manor built in the 1700s, tucked deep into the countryside. But by the late 1970s, it was in ruins, weather-beaten, crumbling, and wrapped in ivy. Locals kept their distance, speaking only in hushed tones about the strange family who once lived there and the tragedies that befell them. In 1979, a group of architecture students from Exeter University received permission to document the site for a restoration project. The students, 5 in total, arrived with clipboards, cameras, and eager excitement. They were fascinated by the mansion's decayed grandeur, wide marble staircases, shattered chandeliers, and faded portraits still clinging to damp walls. 3 days into their survey, they discovered something that shouldn't have existed. While reviewing original blueprints of the estate, they noticed a room labeled 6B, located between the east hallway and the former library. But when they inspected that section of the house, there was no door, no room, just a long stretch of wall. Confused, they measured the hall. The space between rooms was wider than it should have been, about 12 feet of missing space. Something was there, something hidden. The next day, the students returned with tools. Knocking along the wall revealed a hollow section. Beneath the cracked plaster, they found an old wooden door, sealed shut with rusted iron brackets. There was no handle, just a single word carved faintly into the wood, S-T-Y. Ignoring the warning, they pried the brackets loose and forced the door open. The room inside was untouched by time. Unlike the rest of the house, it was clean, dust-free. A round table sat in the center with 2 chairs. A teacup rested beside an unlit candle. The air was still, too still, no wind, no scent of decay. But the mirror was the most disturbing. It stood nearly floor to ceiling on the far wall, framed in heavy black iron. As each student stepped into the room, they noticed something wrong. The reflection didn't match the room. Not exactly. Each of them saw a slightly different version of themselves, older, sickly, bruised. One girl, named Alice, gasped and backed away. She swore she saw her reflection lying lifeless on the table. One of the students, Mark, suddenly felt faint. He said he couldn't breathe, that the mirror was pulling something from him. They dragged him out of the room and slammed the door shut. The next day, when they returned with their professor, the door was gone. The hallway wall was sealed again, smooth and blank. The brackets had vanished, and the blueprint they'd printed, room 6B, had disappeared from the layout. They left that afternoon and never went back. Grenfell Hall was later declared unsafe and condemned. It still stands, quietly crumbling into the trees, and the room, wherever it went, has never been found again. The Man in the Hotel Mirror. Based on documented guest reports, Illinois, 1992. In January of 1992, a traveling salesman named Richard Holloway was forced to pull off the highway in northern Illinois during a relentless snowstorm. It was nearly midnight, visibility was poor, and most of the hotels were full. After calling around, he managed to get a last-minute room at a small roadside inn, one of those quiet, outdated places with flickering neon signs and carpet that hadn't changed since the 70s. He checked into room 305, thankful to be out of the cold. The room itself was unremarkable. Faded wallpaper, a sagging mattress, and the constant hum of the heater. But one thing stood out. A tall mirror was mounted directly across from the bed, fixed to the wall like it had been there forever. It was full length with a thick wooden frame, and though the glass had warped slightly with age, it still reflected clearly. Richard didn't think much of it at first. He set his suitcase down, made a quick call to his wife, and turned in for the night. That's when things got strange. At exactly 2:13 a.m., Richard woke up suddenly, not from a noise, but from the overwhelming sensation that he wasn't alone. His eyes flicked open, and there, in the dim light from the parking lot outside, he saw something in the mirror. A man, standing in the reflection. He was tall, pale, dressed in a black suit that looked decades out of style. He wasn't in the room, not physically. Just in the mirror, watching. Richard jumped up and turned on the light. The room was empty. He stared at the mirror, heart pounding. The reflection showed only what was actually there. The bed, the curtains, the wall. No man. Trying to dismiss it as a dream, he turned the lights off again and got back into bed. But the feeling returned. He felt pressure, like someone leaning over him. When he opened his eyes again, the man was back. Same posture, same expressionless stare. Except now, his hand was raised, as if he were tapping the glass. Richard didn't sleep for the rest of the night. At sunrise, he went down to the front desk and asked if anyone had ever complained about that room, particularly the mirror. The young desk clerk looked uncomfortable. After a pause, he admitted that yes, guests had strange things over the years. Some claimed they saw things in the glass. Others reported sleepwalking, whispers, or feelings of dread. One even broke the mirror and demanded a refund, saying something inside it had spoken his name. Richard asked to switch rooms, but everything was still booked because of the storm. With no other choice, he returned this time determined not to look into the mirror at all. He grabbed a bath towel from the bathroom and hung it over the glass. He didn't care if it looked strange. He just wanted to sleep. That night, it didn't work. At 3:00 a.m., the towel fell to the floor. Richard sat up slowly. The mirror was no longer reflecting room 305. Instead, it showed something else, a narrow staircase descending into darkness. At the top of the stairs stood the man in the suit, staring directly out of the glass, hand outstretched. Then the lights flickered, and the mirror began to tremble, vibrating slightly, like something was behind it, trying to come through. Richard panicked. He grabbed his suitcase and ran out into the hallway in his pajamas. He didn't care about the snow, or the ice, or anything else. He checked out at the desk, without explanation, and drove through the storm until he reached the next town. When the hotel owner inspected room 305 later that day, the mirror was shattered. But not broken outward. The cracks ran from the inside, spidering toward the surface. The frame was warm to the touch. They replaced the mirror the following week, and for a time, things were quiet. But every few years, a guest still complains about room 305. They see someone in the mirror who shouldn't be there. And if they look too long, the reflection changes, showing things that haven't happened yet. The Children in the Cornfield. Based on Farm Family Testimony, Nebraska, 1997. In the summer of 1997, the Corbin family moved to a quiet farm outside Kearney, Nebraska. The property had everything they wanted: a 2-story farmhouse, a red barn, and 20 acres of corn that stretched all the way to the tree line. It was peaceful, isolated, and perfect for their 3 young children. The first few months were uneventful. The kids loved exploring the fields and playing hide and seek among the tall stalks. But things changed one August evening when their youngest, Emily, came inside just before sunset. She was quiet, pale. When her mother asked what was wrong, Emily whispered, "There are kids in the corn." Her parents laughed it off, assuming she'd imagined something. But the next day, their son Lucas came running in crying. He said a little girl with black eyes had followed him through the rows, whispering his name. Over the next week, all 3 children became terrified of the fields. They said the other kids only came out at night, and that they didn't walk, they floated. They told stories about voices in the corn, calling them deeper into the rows. They begged not to go outside after dark. Corbins tried to stay calm, but soon they noticed things themselves. The cornfields seemed different, always rustling, even when the wind was still. At night, they sometimes heard faint laughter coming from deep in the stalks. Once, the father saw movement out the window quick, small shapes darting between the rows. But when he went to check, there was no one there. They installed floodlights and motion sensors. The lights would flicker randomly at night. The sensors would beep, but nothing would be visible on the cameras. Just rows and rows of swaying corn. One night, things escalated. Emily began screaming in her sleep. When her mother ran in, she found the child standing at the window, eyes wide open, staring at the corn. She said the children were calling her name, asking her to come play. The next morning, the Corbins found small, muddy footprints on their back porch, far too small for an adult, and too many for their 3 children. The family contacted the previous owner, a widowed farmer named Gerald McGowan. At first, he was hesitant to talk, but eventually he admitted that strange things had always happened in that field. He said that decades ago, during a dust storm, a school bus full of children vanished, never found. Some believed it had crashed into a ravine on the edge of the property. Others said the field had taken them. The Corbins didn't wait to find out. They put the house up for sale and moved out within a month. The new owners bulldozed the cornfield the following spring and replaced it with pasture land. But local kids still say the air feels different. They're heavy, cold. And sometimes, late at night, you can hear small voices laughing among the trees, calling out, waiting to be heard. The Whispering Tenant, based on a landlord's testimony in Oregon, 2003. In the fall of 2003, a landlord named Martin Glass received an urgent call from one of his tenants in Portland, Oregon. The young woman, Amanda, had just moved into the second-floor unit of an old 3-story house he'd been renting out for years. Her message was shaky, almost unintelligible, something about voices in the walls and a man whispering at night. Martin had heard complaints The four creaky floors, drafty windows, typical things in an old building. But this was different. Amanda said the whispers were clear, intentional, like someone knew she was alone and was trying to get her attention. He drove over the next morning. Amanda looked exhausted. She hadn't slept in 2 nights. She insisted the voice always came at the same time, 2:44 a.m., and that it spoke her name. Sometimes it said things like, "Let me in," or "I see you." Other times, it just laughed. Martin checked the apartment. He knocked on the walls, looked in the crawl space, even went into the unit below. It was empty, had been for over a year since the last tenant left without notice. No squatters, no animals, nothing strange. He offered to let Amanda break the lease early, but she refused. She said she just needed a few nights away. Martin didn't hear from her for a week. Then he got another call, this time from the police. Amanda's downstairs neighbors, who had just moved in days prior, had reported screaming coming from the second floor. When officers arrived, they found Amanda sitting on the floor of her kitchen, rocking slowly. The walls were covered in words, written in marker, chalk, whatever she could find. Most of it was her name, written over and over. One word appeared more than any other: stop. Amanda was taken to a hospital for evaluation. Martin, deeply shaken, returned to the property to clean up. He figured the stress of moving, isolation, or maybe an underlying condition had triggered something in her. But then he saw what she'd written inside the hall closet, something she hadn't mentioned. "I am not alone in this room." Martin closed the unit temporarily and did some renovations, trying to move on. But what happened next was harder to explain. Every new tenant who moved into that Unit 3 over the next 5 years reported something eerily similar. Whispers, always late at night, always from the walls. One woman said she heard breathing through the heater vent. Another claimed someone called her by name, even though she'd never told anyone she was moving in. One tenant, a man named Lucas, stayed longer than the rest. He was practical. He didn't scare easily. But after 7 months, he packed up and left in the middle of the night. When Martin asked why, Lucas simply said, "The whisper learned to follow me into my dreams." Eventually, Martin stopped renting the unit. He kept it empty, sealed. Sometimes, when he's there late at night fixing something upstairs, he swears he hears something in the hall. His name, whispered softly from behind the door. The Hitchhiker on River Road. Based on police and driver reports, Tennessee, 1987-2001. River Road in central Tennessee winds through miles of dense forest, flanked by cliffs and streams. It's beautiful by day, but at night, locals know to avoid it. The legend started in 1987, when a trucker named Dale saw a girl standing by the roadside just after midnight. She was barefoot, wearing a light dress despite the cold. Thinking she was stranded, he pulled over and asked if she needed help. She nodded silently and climbed into the cab. Dale said she never spoke, just stared forward, hands folded in her lap. After a few miles, she pointed to a bend in the road and whispered, "Here." He stopped the truck and turned to ask if she had someone to call, but she was gone. No door opened. No sound. Just gone. Dale didn't report it at first. He figured he was tired, hallucinating. But 2 weeks later, a woman crashed her car on the same stretch of road. She swerved to avoid hitting what she described as a pale girl in a white dress standing in the road. Over the next decade, sightings increased. Drivers claimed to see her on nights, always near mile marker 33. Some said she tried to wave them down. Others said she walked in front of their car and vanished on impact. In 1996, a young couple picked her up during a rainstorm. She sat silently in the back seat. The girlfriend offered her a blanket, but the girl just stared at the window. When they reached the girl's supposed address, the house was dark, clearly abandoned. They turned to ask if she had another place to go. She was no longer in the car. The seat was wet, but the door had never opened. In 2001, a local deputy reviewed all the reports and decided to investigate. He dug through old newspapers and town records. What he found chilled him. In 1975, a teenage girl named Eleanor Mason had gone missing after prom. She was last seen walking home along River Road after a fight with her date. Her body was never found, but her shoes were left neatly side by side near the edge of the river. The description of Eleanor matched nearly every sighting. Same dress, same hair, same silence. The road was later expanded and repaved. Mile marker 33 was removed during construction, but drivers still report her. Always alone, always on foot, always waiting. And if you stop, if you look too long, she just might climb inside.